Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. The big drama continues going into the Austin Grand Prix weekend, with a big rumour yesterday emerging that the T-Tray special trick device that a certain team may or may not have been using on the grid, turns out that was actually Red Bull that had the device in the car. Red Bull have admitted this device exists. They, however, say they were not using it to break parc ferme conditions, but many other drivers and teams on the grid, understandably, are not so convinced. The McLaren boys especially believe this is absolutely black and white evidence that Red Bull were effectively cheating with their car so far this season. If this is true, we should probably expect to see a drop-off in qualifying performance this weekend from Red Bull. If we do potentially see that in Austin this weekend, then serious questions will be raised as to how legitimate their results actually were so far this season, and potentially over the last couple of years as well, especially as far as Lewis Hamilton is concerned. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Massive bombshell news again in Formula 1 coming out of the Red Bull side. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. As always, you're not going to want to miss any of the updates coming soon on this one. Let's just dive straight into things as ever. Yuki Tsunoda talking about his relationship with Daniel Ricciardo, of course, not going to be driving in the RB this weekend. And as Yuki says, I thought it was kind of nice. We say thank you, we appreciate each other. I was being emotional, to be honest, because I think Daniel has been a very good teammate, and I think the driver that I learned the most from. But of course, it's Liam Lawson's first time in the car this weekend. Not first time in the car, first time in this year's car at least. This weekend in a race condition. He's got a sprint to contend with. Then he's got a penalty in the race because of an engine change. So it's not going to be an easy start for Lawson, but we'll see how his rest of the season goes. Yuki as well was asked the question, right, what about the Red Bull seat? You think you deserve it? And Yuki says, well, previous years maybe not, but this year, yeah. So, fair play. I don't blame Yuki. I think I honestly agree, given his performance. And look, he respects Ricciardo Tsunoda for sure, but, Yuki knows that he's effectively vanquished another teammate. And you'd think that would have been enough to get a spot or at least be considered, but maybe it is not quite so simple. Perez, though, does say that he ain't going anywhere. Now, he did obviously tweet out about this, kind of saying, I ain't effing leaving. And then he says to the media yesterday, I'll be here next year, 100%. So, he's 100% confident that he's going to be here. Do Red Bull agree? Does Horner agree? I don't know. But seemingly Perez must know something we don't, because if Perez was at risk, then surely he would at least be aware on some level, even though the words publicly from Red Bull seem to suggest that he's not safe. I mean, Helmut Marko literally said he expects a junior driver alongside Max in the car next year. That is the chief advisor of Red Bull saying that Perez isn't going to be there anymore. So, what does Perez know? I don't know. Perez does also go on to say, though, kind of interesting, that he had other teams offer him a seat. I wouldn't be surprised if over the last couple of seasons that's been true. We know that obviously with Perez maybe struggling at Red Bull, other teams thought, look, Perez could do a solid job for us. It makes sense. Bring him in as a veteran driver with, as we know full well, some serious financial backing as well. But Perez then said, I really love the challenge that I've got at Red Bull. It's a massive challenge with Max's teammate. It's a challenge that basically trains you for all of it. So, I do commend Perez for sticking with it. But at the same time, you're going to leave Red Bull to go to another team, especially when Red Bull are the best team, because, you're at least winning championships at the top of the grid. Maybe not this season, no constructors, no drivers, it seems, for Sergio Perez. But at least you're giving yourself a chance, maybe, to win the Drivers' Championship. If something happens to Max and, he just doesn't perform for, 90% of the season, maybe Perez could win, I don't know. But that's what Perez was talking about there. Max also, I will say, yesterday, all the drama was happening, of course, that we'll get into in a second, and in the press conferences. But Max has not yet received anything from the FIA over this autumn break period to say, all right, Max, our bad, we don't mind so much about the swearing, right? Please tone it down, but we won't come and get you, whatever. That didn't happen. So Max is saying, all right, well, I'm still not going to speak. I haven't heard anything from the FIA, so for me, it doesn't change anything. I prefer, of course, to talk less, so it's fine by me. So Max will just sit there and say nothing in the press conferences, basically, and just repeat words. And then he will give more extensive answers to the media. He doesn't have a problem with the media, necessarily. It's just he has a problem with the FIA, and I get it, to be honest, straight up. Even George Russell says that the drivers, because he's kind of the head of the drivers, basically union, as it were, they're going to put a pen to paper to pen a public letter amid the FIA swearing row. So it seems like next weekend, I think is what Russell said, they're going to put together a letter explaining their perspective on the situation amid this whole drama. So yeah, that's going to continue, I'm sure of it. Quickly on Mercedes as well, Russell also mentioned that over the last couple of weeks, Mercedes have discovered a couple of things on their car because they had the autumn break. They're back at the factory looking at all the data from the season, and they've seen a couple of things in their car that they want to change for next year. So, of course, next year, everyone's car is going to be an evolution, generally, rather than a revolution. But I think Mercedes have been looking for some answers as to why their pace just hasn't been as good over the last few rounds. And it seems like Mercedes have found a couple of things they want to change for next season. It's probably too little, too late this year, but they do have a major upgrade package on the way this weekend. They believe it's going to help, but as we know with upgrade packages, certainly on the floor of the car, which we think Mercedes is going to be, and also true for Red Bull, if you increase the downforce of the floor, great, but do you affect the balance? That is the problem. Because back in the day, a few years ago in F1, let's say pre-2022, just bring as much downforce as you can, and that's usually going to work. Whereas, especially now with the floor and the ground effect, there are other problems to contend with. Another big update yesterday, and in some respects a legacy for Daniel Ricciardo, is that they've officially decided that the fastest lap bonus point will be dropped going into next year. It came back a few years ago, and now it's gone again. This is, of course, controversial, the fastest lap point, because what happened in Singapore was especially controversial. Ricciardo goes out on his final ever Grand Prix lap, takes the fastest lap, sets the track record actually technically because of the changes to the circuit to make it even faster. And Ricciardo sets the fastest lap, gets the extra points, or does he? Because he didn't finish in the top 10. But what he did do is prevent Lando Norris from getting the extra point. So, look, I would make the argument, and I'm pretty sure they do this in other FIA series, is to say, well, look, the fastest lap bonus point goes to the driver in the top 10 that had the fastest lap. Any laps outside of the top 10 are not included. That's one way to do it, and that seems pretty reasonable to me. But that's not how the rules were written. The rules are written that, okay, the fastest lap point goes to the driver with the fastest lap, unless if they were not in the top 10, in which case they don't get the point, which kind of disincentivizes what Ricciardo did. But so did Ricciardo do it because it was his final ever lap, just for a bit of fun? Maybe. Was it also partially implied by the fact that they wanted to take it off Norris because of Verstappen? Probably that was also part of the reasoning as well, which is why it caused lots of drama, because there's, another entity using the advantage there to take a point off Lando, which is not even going to benefit VCARB, but it is going to benefit potentially Red Bull Racing and Max Verstappen. So that was the drama. It's an interesting legacy that Ricciardo leaves, really, that his final act on the track was, and it's clearly related to that saga, isn't it? Because, just a couple of weeks after that happens, now they've confirmed that, they're just going to get rid of the fastest lap bonus point again, which I think is maybe the right decision. The drivers, I think, are pretty happy about this. To be honest, the fastest lap bonus point it pretty rarely determines who was actually the fastest guy on the track, really. Often it'll just be someone who has a decent enough gap and delta to the car behind in the midfield somewhere will put on, the brand new set of softs and set the fastest lap. It's not even impressive. I think that's what I don't like about the fastest lap point, is that it's not impressive to box for a new set of soft tyres and then do a lap. You don't even have to push that hard on the fastest lap. It's just your tyres are so much quicker that you can do it for free. It's not like a real, oh wow, fastest lap, what a great achievement. It's just, it always is going to happen if someone puts on a set of softs. It's not impressive. So I think I'm quite happy they get rid of it. But let's dive into the real juicy stuff here, because last night we saw all the talk about the T-tray, the front bib, the splitter, as people described it as on the car. That is this element of the car that we talked about in quite some detail yesterday. It's pretty much hidden from the front. You can see it from certain angles, from the side and from the ground of the car, and it's something that would be incredibly difficult to visually determine whether the ride height of this element would have changed between qualifying and the race. Now, the rumour had it that one team was changing the height of this under parc ferme conditions, of course, which is strictly forbidden, to gain some degree of competitive advantage. And clearly there was evidence to support this, because many teams had been in conversation with the FIA about this since the Singapore Grand Prix weekends, and we can now very much guess who those teams might potentially have been as a result of all the drama that happened last night, because Red Bull were then implicated, because Eric Van Haren was then the first to break the story let's not forget as well, he is very close to the Verstappens, especially to Jos Verstappen. He was the one to leak all the rumours about Horner, and I would not be surprised at all if this information that Red Bull were being accused of this, because the initial article for Motorsport said the teams believe someone has a device. We don't know who that team is, but it obviously had to be some sort of front runner, otherwise nobody would really care. That's how it tends to be. So, of course, in yesterday's video we said, could it be McLaren? Could it be Red Bull? Those were the key targets, especially because it's not like Red Bull don't have a history of pushing the boundaries of the rules. They do, as do McLaren, right? So, and other teams do as well. But certainly this season and the last couple of seasons, they were the chief candidates. But we didn't know which team it was. But then Eric Van Haren later in the day says, no, it was Red Bull. They're the team being accused. And as I say, I wouldn't be surprised at all, given that Jos Verstappen hates Christian Horner and seemingly wants to see the downfall of Red Bull, which is surprising because his son drives for the team. And maybe it's not exactly that Jos wants the downfall of Red Bull, it's more so that he wants the downfall of Horner. I think Jos's opinion is that if the team was under different leadership, the team would be in a better spot, and if Horner stays, the team will continue to collapse and Max will leave. I think that's what Jos Verstappen predicts and thinks is going to happen. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if Jos is the one to have told Eric and then the media that, yeah, Red Bull are the team accused of this. It's all Horner, pushing the boundaries of the rules, breaking the rules, cheating, whatever. The issue is, of course, that if Jos did say that, it kind of undermines Verstappen's accomplishments on some level, if this is true. Now, Red Bull are going to say it's not true. Red Bull deny this is the case of using this ride height trick, the idea being that between qualifying and the actual race itself, they can adjust the ride height level through a special device in the cockpit to change the height of the front bib, which then affects the ride height of the car in general, only very marginally, but something that would provide a performance advantage because you can then run the car lower for quali, run the car higher for the race, and benefit without needing the compromise that other teams deal with. This is interesting as well. A rival team pushed the FIA about it in Singapore. I said this at the time, did I not? When the rear wing of the McLaren was flexing and was under pressure, and McLaren said, all right, you know what, our rear wing, yeah, maybe it was a little bit illegal, a little bit of mini DRS, whatever, we'll take it off the car, no problem, we'll do right by the FIA. Technically it conformed, right? Technically that rear wing conformed to the specifications of the regulations, but it was deforming more than was intended by the spirit of the regulations, and likely was flexing more than intended anyway. It's just you couldn't test it on the ground, but you could see it in the cameras. So McLaren said, all right, guys, you got us. We're going to take it off the car, but in return, we want you guys to consider what we have to say when we bring something to you. And then the next weekend in Singapore, presumably McLaren then say to the FIA, hey, how about this? Red Bull got us on the rear wing, the mini DRS, so we're going to get them on this. And of course, the FIA are like, well, fair enough, McLaren, you did take action on this, which you didn't necessarily have to, but you decided to, do the right thing, whatever. And therefore, the FIA were expected by McLaren to probably do the right thing about this Red Bull thing, which is now what they have done. And Red Bull, now that this was leaked publicly, and Eric Van Haren reported it, Red Bull kind of had to admit it, right? So a Red Bull spokesperson told BBC Sport, yes, the device exists, although it is inaccessible once the car is fully assembled and ready to run. In the numerous correspondence we have had with the FIA, this part came up, and we have agreed a plan going forwards, presumably not to use it anymore or something like that. So Red Bull literally admitted to having this device on the car, and the device seemingly was somewhere in the cockpit. They could make an adjustment which would affect this part of the car, and that was seen on the data and basically the database of car designs that's uploaded to the FIA. Now, you might argue that Red Bull would, be stupid to actually use this because, maybe it was going to be discovered eventually that something like this was happening, but they've admitted they're going to change the car. And this is the point that I said yesterday. What Red Bull are saying is that there's a device in the cockpit which allows them to change the ride height there, which they're simply using for, another way to do it. I mean, they could change it themselves in practice, before qualifying, before parc ferme comes in. They can make those tweaks, but what they're saying is that there's a device in the cockpit, presumably, because that was the rumor yesterday, that enables them to make that change, but they don't use it. after parc ferme. Obviously, why would they use it? That'd be breaking the rules, right? So, yeah, Red Bull definitely don't use this device, despite the fact that they have it, right? So this is the issue, as I said yesterday, that we run into here, whereby Red Bull have admitted they've got this device, but they say, well, it's not accessible, we can't use it between parc ferme, we can't change the ride height between quali and the race, we only use it, you know, outside of that for other purposes. But, you know, why would it exist if it wasn't able to do what people are implying that it might be able to do? But Red Bull are going to say, well, we never used it for that, and there's probably no evidence that they did, which is why this kind of trickery, this kind of, you know, if you want to call it cheating, whatever, illegal car, whatever, like, is so clever, and why I love Formula 1 in many respects, because, you know, teams are going to try things if they think they can get away with it. And if Red Bull have been doing this, which, I mean, do we really believe Red Bull? Red Bull say they've not used this. Do we really believe them? I don't know. I'm not convinced. And also, Red Bull, presumably when they designed this, if they were trying to use it for the purposes we think they might have been, they would have known that there was basically no way to prove it. So if they ever got caught, they could just say, well, it exists, but we never used it. So what are you going to do, guys? I think that might be where we are. And therefore, McLaren are like, hang on a second, like, have they been having a car which, because on paper, if you can make these changes, you can run your car lower for quali and then raise it for the race and, you know, have an advantage. And presumably you're going to favour the race trim over qualifying trim. So the theory goes that if this is true, then Red Bull's quali pace this weekend won't be as impressive as it will typically be compared to their race pace. That's the theory anyway, or maybe the other way around. That's also possible. But of course, they're upgrading the works this weekend, so it's going to be very difficult to really tell whether this was having an impact or not, I would say. But yeah, McLaren's Lando Norris says when you see polls decided by thousands, maybe that would change something. He doesn't think that it's made a massive difference necessarily, but sources close to the situation say the FIA was informed of this over the course of the Singapore Grand Prix weekend. Rivals had seen its existence in what are known as open source component documents that the teams had to provide to the FIA about the design of their cars, and of course they could do various things that would provide an advantage. And Max then actually commented on it and said, for us it was just a simple tool where the parts weren't on the car, easy to adjust the car. Once the car was assembled, you couldn't touch it anymore. For us, it doesn't change anything. So, you know, maybe this is true, and fair enough if this is true, and it sounds plausible. What Max says sounds very plausible, that there's this tool that they have that could adjust the car parts, and Red Bull had it and other teams didn't have it, and it was not accessible once the car was assembled, which, you know, may be true, but is it true? Like, would Max even know? Would Max even know if it was possible to reach this tool inside the cockpit and a mechanic was going in there with a certain tool and making a small adjustment between parc ferme, you know, under parc ferme conditions, between quali and the race? The reality is we're never going to know, but Red Bull had a device which is theoretically potentially capable of something like this, and they're saying they're not using it. So who knows, right? But we might be able to see some evidence of that on track. And if there is a noticeable difference, if there's anything to say on that at all, then it really is going to create a fascinating end to the season, right? Especially if Red Bull's performance does suffer somewhat on some level, then, you know, does it make Lando even more of a, you know, favourite to make the comeback, as it were, to potentially win this championship? And if Verstappen does hold on, then what does it mean about the championship win? It's drama, it's Formula 1, it is what it is. Hamilton, of course, comments on it and says that maybe, you know, how long has this device existed? Is it just the RB20? Was it on previous year's ones? We don't know. Probably only this one, otherwise people would have seen it before, but, you know, it's taken them several months for any team to discover that it exists. So, you know, it was probably hidden in there somewhere, and Red Bull could have been winning championships with this, says Hamilton. So that's his perspective. And even Oscar says, like, this is not pushing the boundaries, because, you know, the argument for McLaren is that, well, okay, maybe we push the boundaries with our rear wing or whatever, mini DRS, but this is clearly breaking the rules as far as they're concerned. So McLaren are going to take the hardline approach that, yeah, Red Bull were using this, and therefore we need serious repercussions. The reality is those repercussions are probably not going to happen, but it is nonetheless going to be a fascinating weekend. So early video for you guys today, because we have practice later this evening. Might do another video recapping that, especially if there are interesting storylines that I'm sure will continue to come out of it. But very much interested in your thoughts as ever on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.